So before we start, a couple of quick statements. First of all, I want to express our sincere thanks to the New York Southeast Asia Network, NYSEAN, for making the PUC possible, and to the Luce Foundation for making NYSEAN possible. And I will pause and let Margaret Scott from NYSEAN say a little bit about the New York Southeast Asia Network for those not yet familiar with that network.
I'm here, but I can't get my video there. Okay. Hi. I was here yesterday and I thought your conference inaugural day was just so good and wonderful. Congratulations, Meredith. Congratulations to everybody who worked on putting this Public Universities Consortium together. I'm Margaret Scott. I haven't looked at who's on, but I see there's a lot of people here. The New York Southeast Asia Network is a virtual network. And it's been sort of a labor of love for a lot of people. It's NYU, Columbia, Seton Hall, and then it's grown dramatically. And Meredith is now a core member, and Karen Strassler and Martina Nguyen and Kosal Path, and it goes on and on. The people who are in this SUNY and CUNY world that have gotten the bug for this virtual collaboration, and we hope that much, much more will grow out of this. And everybody at NYSEAN and at the Luce Foundation absolutely loves this NYSEAN PUC, and I'm delighted to be here and very excited about its prospects and its longevity. So thank you all.
Okay, and most importantly, I want to thank very sincerely, again, the group of students, both graduate and undergraduate, who have pulled this initiative together and organized this conference, basically the entirety of it. So I'll just run through just names in alphabetical order: Alyssa, Asari, Charmaine, Jeffrey, Karina, Crystal, Neural, Kwang, and especially Zhang Wang, who's been the coordinator of the entire effort. And so I think all of you have gotten, well, everyone who's here has gotten at least one email from Zhang reminding you of your registration. But thanks especially and enormously to those students for their amazing work on the conference. Okay, without further ado, I will turn things over to Nerv, who will moderate today's session.
Thank you, Professor Meredith Weiss, and thank you to Zhang Wang for really doing a great job, fantastic job in organizing our session today. And congratulations to everyone for our inaugural conference with NYSEAN. I was also present yesterday. It was really wonderful to hear a couple of our librarians and also like experts and faculty members to talk about the prospects of doing Southeast Asian research in the region. So I'm really excited for our conversation today. We will be focusing on graduate student related topics. So I'm hoping you are all excited. And while we're just like setting up, I'll be introducing our panelists, our esteemed panelists today. I invite everybody in the room to actually put it in the chat. Which university you're affiliated with, what countries or country you're studying, and maybe what's one thing that brings you joy during this pandemic. So those three things, right? Like which university you're affiliated with, what country or countries you're studying, and what's something that brings you joy, even if it's like tiny sliver of joy in this pandemic. Will be interesting to hear that, at least like read it, and also just like to get to know everybody in the room and build our community here. Great. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is the beauty of being on Zooms. Like, you know, we can actually fight the tyranny of space and time and be together, right? As a geographer, that's really something I appreciate with this kind of online platform. But I know everybody has like some level of Zoom fatigue, so I appreciate the time and the energy that we are dedicating today. And we really are excited to have you here join us and listen and meet our esteemed panelists of speakers. So I'll introduce myself quickly, and then I will meet our panelists today. So my name is Nerv Makaspak. I'm currently an assistant professor of geography at the City University of New York at the College of Staten Island, and I'm also a doctoral faculty at the Earth and Environmental Sciences doctoral program at the Graduate Center. So I'm a political geographer. I study the phenomenon of community-led demilitarized geographic areas, or popularly known as peace zones, to better understand the geographies of peace and violence and the specialities of local or community-led peace building. One quick trivia. When I was a graduate student, my first presentation about my dissertation was at a conference organized by Professor Meredith Weiss at Stockholm University. I don't know, like 2015, I forgot, totally 2015, yeah?
Yeah, sometime around then. Yeah.
Oh my
Wow.
God, that was my
I didn't realize that
first,
was your first.
yes, that was my first presentation of my initial findings from my fieldwork data. And that was like such a wonderful experience. And that the presentation from that conference actually led to, years after, actually led to a paper, to an article that I was able to publish in 2018. 3 years after the conference, but it still managed, still managed to get it out there. So anyway, so just like a really nice kind of coming full circle with our conference and our NYSEAN network here, and I'm really excited to be part of this community. Great, so let's proceed with our panelists here. So again, like this is the graduate student panel. So we'll be covering everything from grant writing, from dissertation writing, from methods, from research questions to job and postdoc position, job market, stuff like that, everything that we can think about and ask. This is a good opportunity for us to speak together and hear our esteemed panelists here for their wisdom and experience and also advice and recommendations. So I'm going through my list here. I'm going to introduce our panelists and I'm just going to follow the order as listed in our event information. So first speaker we have is Dr. Alex Tai Vo. He has a PhD in history from Cornell University, and he's a historian and an expert for DPAA-HI-IP. He will talk more about that, I'm sure, as he introduces himself and his expertise. And next up is we will listen to Dr. Dat Nguyen. Dr. Dat Nguyen has a PhD in Socio-cultural Anthropology from Boston University, and he's currently a postdoctoral researcher at the NIOD Institute. Looking forward to hear more about his work as well. And then our third speaker is Dr. Jessica Soedirgo. Jessica has a PhD in political science from the University of Toronto, and she is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Studies at Georgetown University, and currently an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. Welcome. And our fourth and last but not the least speaker is Dr. Mary Ann Mendoza. So she has a PhD in political science from UC Irvine, University of California in Irvine. And Dr. Mary Ann Mendoza is currently an assistant professor of political science in the Department of Political Science at Cal State Polytechnic University in Pomona. Great, so welcome everybody, and we will just follow this order, I believe, for our panelists. And so we will start with Dr. Alex Tai Vo, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the panelists. And for our guests here joining us today in our Zoom room, we will have a Q&A segment after we hear from our panelists. So each panelist will speak for around 15 to 20 minutes. And I hope you all take notes, and you're welcome to chat in your questions as we go in the chat box, and then we'll read and listen to your questions after all our panelists have spoken. So without further ado, I'll turn over our Zoom microphone to Dr. Alex Tai Vo.
Thank you, Nev, so much for the kind introduction, and also for everyone for putting this together, especially Kwan for and Jung for having really communicated with me for the past month or two about this, and this is really cool. So I just to share a little bit about myself before going in, and what my topic is today in terms of sharing with you guys. Like Nev just said, I finished my PhD at Cornell, and then I did a postdoc at the Global Studies Institute at Oregon, non-residential. So I was still at Cornell, And then the pandemic came, and then I accepted a job at the Defense POW MIA accounting agency. So I moved to Hawaii. So today's talk, because in communication with Nguyen, I decided to focus more on the fellowship that I got when I was there at Cornell, the Mellon ACOS. So I'll focus on that, but then I certainly can talk about my jobs and my postdoc experience later during the Q&A. So I do have a few slides just so that you guys don't have to try to oops, where is it? Just give me 1 second here. It's too early. So can you guys see? Yeah. Okay. So I'll start by what I said up there. Start early in relation to the Mellon ACOS, but also in general in terms of applying for grants and fellowships while you're in graduate school. So start early. Don't wait. Figure it out ASAP and set deadlines. So what do I mean? Figure it out, what is out there, what you want and what fits you. Do that research ahead of time. So most of the grants that you will be applying for is in the fall, even jobs and whatnot. Don't wait till then. Don't wait past summer. Start before, because it's just a cycle, right? Every year it kind of repeats itself. So do the research, do the work ahead of time. Why do I say that? Start the process, the application process as soon as possible. Why? Because you will see that these deadlines will catch up to you and you will chase it. And then what happened is that you most likely will rush, procrastinate, and submit an application that is not worthy for it or whatnot, right? So know the deadlines and set your own set of deadlines, right? So for example, for the ACOS, the deadline for this year for the 2021 application is going to be late October 28th, if I'm not mistaken. Go to their website and check it out. Really note all these stuff down and set yourself deadlines before that. For example, so I would set myself the deadline that I would finish all the application materials a month ahead so that I can let it sit, I can revise it, I can have a friend look it over and then polish it before submitting, right? Rather than rush it through and then procrastinate to the last day of the application process and try to submit it in. So those are the suggestions that I would have in terms of approaching fellowship in terms of the initial stage. Find out about it as soon as possible, especially in the spring. Don't wait to summer and past that. And next is take the process seriously, be selective and be focused. Rather than trying to apply to every fellowship out there that you see, a lot of them are very intriguing and enticing and you want to get it. Don't exert yourself so much and try to apply to 25 or 50 grants, because by then you will come to realize that you will fatigue out and you feel so depressed and because eventually you're not going to get them all. You're not going to get a letter back even, right? And so what you're going to feel is dejected and all these feelings. You don't want to have to deal with that. Just focus on the ones that you see that best fits you and you best fit it, right? And concentrate on that few, 5, 10 or whatnot, so that you are doing the best with it, Hence, conduct a thorough research about the fellowship and understand what it is looking for in an applicant, right? Know the fellowship's objectives and mission and requirements. These are crucial. Why? Because, so for example, the ACOS is that you have to be a PhD candidate, you have to be ABD, you have to be kind of like no more than 6 years. I mean, you can be in your 7th year, but then you have to communicate with them and try to negotiate to see if they will accept your application. So if you're in your 7th year and you're not sure, don't send an application because they're going to reject it. Talk to them, contact them, email them, right? And then you have to be done with it by the end of August of the next year after you receive the fellowship, right? So understand that because they are most likely not going to make a lot of exception in terms of course, they're not going to take you back the money or the fellowship or anything like that. But the thing is that you have to deal with a lot of bureaucratic stuff, and your university will try to kick you out as soon as possible as it ends. My experience, it will try to kick you out because the longer you are in, it's more complicated for them, right? For your university. So understand all that. And so next is also, for example, with ACOS, what I'm asking you to look for when you apply, as with many other scholarship and fellowships, is that look for the requirements and then look for keywords, like I say, that are always there on the first page in terms of the description of what it is requiring, right? Read it, understand these vocabularies and use them, right? In your cover letters, in your proposal, in whatnot. Everybody is doing this, but the thing is that if you don't do it, your application is gone, right? Because everybody's doing it. So do it, but do it in a way that possibly try to be better than others, right? That's the more relatable to the fellowships and the reviewers and whomever, right? So understand the keywords. Application requirements. So, right, with the ACOS, you have to submit it online. This is also crucial. So sometimes when you try to apply for an application, you don't pay attention, and you know near the end of it, you realize, oh shoot, you have to send it by mail, right? And if you have to send it by mail, it's more complicated. You have to go to the post office, you get the stamped approval and all these stuff, and sometimes the mail doesn't get there on time, right? So with snail mail, you want to try to submit it as early as possible, 15, 20 days, even before the deadlines, instead of on the deadline, right? So that it gives you an opportunity to correct any problems that might occur as a result. ACOS, there's an application form, right? So go look at this stuff before doing anything else, because the application form is part of this that will that asks a lot of questions that is related to how you would like to also shape your proposal and cover letter, right? So go in, check out the sample application form that they have at the website, which is 26 pages long, right? So it's very long, lengthy. Do it as soon as possible, because a lot of people have a tendency of doing everything else, wait to the end and then try to do the application on the last day or whatnot, and realize, oh shoot, I have this 26-page application form that I have to do out, and rush to do it, because these application forms sometimes takes a lot of time and considerations. They ask tough questions, right? That you have to answer in a paragraph. And that paragraph often is not, you're not just sitting there typing it up. You have to think about it, right? In relation to your application, so that it suits together. So the application form is important in that sense. Get on it as soon as possible. At least try to see a sample of it. Proposal, 1-page timeline. The good thing about the ACOS is, or good or bad, is that you don't have to do a cover letter, right? So you can consider that a good thing or a bad thing, right? Less to write, but less opportunity to present yourself in that way. A bibliography you need to have, all this requirement you can see on the, and then try to understand the evaluation criteria. How is it being evaluated? How is your application going to be evaluated? By whom? Or obviously it's probably going to be sent to experts in your field, at least two, or at least with the ACOS, they will send it to 2 experts in your field who really knows your stuff. At least my reviewers, from the feedback that I got, they really know the stuff that I'm writing on, right? So so make sure to to look at this, in terms of like your contribution, the proposal, is it making a contribution to the field, or its quality in terms of its methodology, its theoretical framework, really cover all these stuff in your proposal, right? Feasibility, can it be achieved? Can you complete your PhD in a timely manner that is, within 1 year, and things like that. You really have to convince the reviewer of all these stuff by presenting concrete evidence in terms of like, hey, I only have like 2 chapters left instead of 5 chapters left, right? And so next is put in the work.
Alex, I'm so sorry. Sorry to interrupt you. I was trying to like get a segue, but we cannot see your PowerPoint. So I think it may be that you have to, when you share your screen, you have to select your desktop or the PowerPoint app on your computer. So sorry about this, but you're also welcome to upload the file later on if you want to share it, so people can also read it. But if you can still, you still have 5 more minutes, so you can still click on your PowerPoint presentation so we can view it. So sorry about that.
No, not a problem. Thanks for the notification. I was just not. Yeah, I'll share. I also have all these notes. So any of you guys would like to see any of these stuff, my application and whatnot, just send me an email. Just say, hey, I want to see this stuff. I'll forward it all to you. And that is one of the points that I would like to make at the end, is just basically share the stuff that you have with other people, right? You finish that phase, you move on, give other people an opportunity to have what you got before. So I'll go back to it, put in the work. So what do I mean by that? Write a serious cover letter, right? If it's required, write a serious research proposal, provide adequate and appropriate supplemental materials. That is, oftentimes is that we take it for granted. Oh yeah, this application is up, and then I'll just rush something out. Take it seriously, right? Draft a draft, sit on it, revise. Have a friend, have a peer reviewer, your advisor, whomever, to take a look, right? Because professor, you guys know that you guys have reviewed so many of these stuff. So ask your advisor, revise. Sit on it again, polish it, submit, and then celebrate, whatever, before you start on your next application, right? So it's a long process. That's why I said start early. You don't want to wait to the end and just write a proposal and submit it. Chances you're not going to get it unless you're very lucky. So with the Mellon ACOS is that, what do you need to do? You don't need a cover letter, great. But the application form, like I said, start early. The proposal needs to have a hook, very attractive hook with that first introductory paragraph, or else, because reviewers are reading thousands, if not hundreds of, if not thousands of these applications, right? What make you different, right? Have an overview of what your project is about. Contextualize it within the scholarship and your contribution to it, and then the sources and methods that you are using. So, and then provide an outline of how you are going to finish your project, right? So it's a very clear set of structure that you should follow. That is how you should just do it. And it's just 5 pages, nothing more than that, but be clear, be concise, and tell people exact date and things like that. Timeline. ACOS will request a timeline as to when you will finish your dissertation. Set concrete timeline, dates, specific dates. Don't just say, I'm just going to finish this in 2021. March 15th, 2021. Right? There's a difference, right? It shows that you know what you're doing and you know your schedule, right? A bibliography. I would recommend a bibliography that's kind of diverse, that address all these aspects, that address the scholarship, not just, I'm a Vietnamese focused, Vietnamese history focused guy, but the bibliography should also address land reform, for example. That was my topic. Other land reforms in other countries too, but also inserts a lot of primary sources to demonstrate demonstrate that you are using, research sources, not just secondary sources. And then last is like the sample chapter. Choose the best and most, this is important because at least for my reviewer, they read the chapters very carefully. So choose the best chapter, but not the one but one that is completed and has enough context for the reader to understand the significance of your projects. Thus, it has to have a kind of like a clear intro, body, and conclusion. It's one that demonstrates your project as a whole, kind of, right? So it's not something that they read and they can't really have an understanding of what your whole project is about. And lastly is like advisor. Who to choose is also very important in terms of who's going to write your letter of recommendation. Of course, you have to have your advisor, but who's the second person? Oftentimes, don't just go to your famous community member who's really famous but doesn't know anything about you. Try not to do that. At least from my experience, I went outside of the field. Someone who never taught me. It's just an associate who understood my work really well, who appreciates my work, and who can not speak about me as a student or as a teacher, but speak about me as a colleague and as a potential collaborator. I think that is important because you are moving to the next stage of your career. So that, and then at the end, don't sell yourself short. Be confident, speak of your strength, speak of your research value, submit, relax, forget about it, let it be, right? So don't submit and just think too much about it. Move on, just let it be. And then one day, who knows, they just sent you an email and said, Alex, or whatever, you just got this, and celebrate, go party, do whatever. But in the meantime, don't worry too much about it. So my email is, I'll type my email in the chat. And please feel free to just send me any question, application. I'll be very, happy to share it with all of you guys. For example, I just recently, when Juan asked me to do this, 2 days later, I got an email from a student who I had shared this with her. She said, I just got it. That's what it's just 3 words. I just got it. That was it. So thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you so much to Dr. Alex Tai-Vo. Really appreciate all those nuggets of wisdom, and I hope everyone's taking notes and listening to all these recommendations. And just to be mindful for time, I'll be timing, setting the timer for all of our speakers. So Dr. Alex Tai-Vo was perfectly in time. And I'll give you a warning just so we can have a 15-minute presentation and we'll have enough time for Q&A later on. So, so I think Dr. Vo, if you don't mind pressing on the stop share screen, so we can actually proceed with our next speaker. And if you're able to see that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to press on the stop share screen icon. Great. Okay, so our next speaker, thank you, Dr. Alex Tai. Our next speaker is Dr. Dat Nguyen, and Dr. Dat Nguyen will also speak about research grant applications and other important things for our graduate education. Dr. Dat Nguyen, take it away.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So thank you for the organizer of the conference. It's an honor to be here and to sort of share the little bit of experience that I have with the whole sort of applying for research grant, but also applying for postdocs. Because I mean, I'm not an expert in any way. I just received my PhD also just last year. And so the little bit of experience that I have, I'll share with you. So currently I am a postdoctoral researcher at the NIOD Institute for War, Holocaust, and Genocide Studies. And I will come back in a little bit about the kind of work that I do at the Research Institute and what it's like to be working at a research-intensive institute in Europe. It's a very different kind of game compared to being in academia in the US. So a little bit of background about myself. So I received my PhD in anthropology from Boston University in 2020, and part of the process of applying, and I think I can sort of started to feel a bit more comfortable talking about the process now. I think I recover a little bit from the dissertation PTSD and and also the process of applying for job applications. If there's a little bit of a sort of pieces of wisdom that I can share, is that one thing is that when you get towards the end of your PhD career and you started to thinking about applying for jobs, particularly jobs in academia, one thing that you should do is, on the one hand, try to get as much of your dissertation done before you start the application process. Because in my experience, it was very gruesome trying to finish your dissertation while applying for job. Because the one thing about job application that you're basically, most of the time, your advisor wouldn't train you for or wouldn't let you know is that the job application process for academic job can be very corporate feeling. You have tons of documents that you have to prepare, and every little job asks for something just a little bit different. But these small differences take a big chunk of your time, and so try to get as much writing done before you start applying for job, because you don't want to drive yourself crazy. And one of the things that I sort of learned throughout the whole process when you're applying for academic job is that you kind of have to sort of prepare yourself both sort of mentally and also prepare your own portfolio. And by portfolio, I mean you kind of have to know yourself and your identity, who you are as a scholar, what kind of contribution you're making to your field, what kind of expert you are, and if you can think ahead of time, what would your sample syllabi look like? Take some time to craft these sample syllabi, because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where a job will ask you for 2 or 3 sample syllabi and you just started working on them now, because those things again also take an inordinate amount of time. The other things about it too is, make sure that you have a group of people in your department or someone who can give you advice and to support you, and to do the kind of mock interviews, to do different kind of workshop with cover letters and application material, because again, every job is a little bit different, and so all you need is just another pair of eyes just to know exactly where to tweak. Now, the other things that I think it was particularly helpful for me was also when it comes time to applying for job, also think about the network that you have built, the professional network that you have built. There's a reason why you have been going to conferences all these years, and you sort of know people, and you know people in your field very well. And it's during this time when you're applying for job, that's when you started to reach out. Of course, you don't have to be sort of extremely sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Be pragmatic, but also, of course, I mean, you approach people that you have already built a relationship with, and so they feel a little bit more comfortable. But in any case, contact your network, and maybe there will be people in your network who knows of physicians who have colleagues who worked on certain project, and they will be able to introduce you. And so being able to put a face to your application, that's very useful. And so one of the things that I like to sort of, just like in the corporate world, when you're applying for a job, you can also, get like informational interviews or something like that. So in academia, there's also something similar in that sense, right? For example, like if there's a PI that's hiring for a postdoc, for example, you can have a chat with the PI just to get to know the PI better, just to get to know the institution better. But those little steps add a little bit of a personal touch to your application. And this is extremely helpful, particularly when there's just so many of us out there, and sometimes having sort of someone know somebody. when you know somebody, I mean, that it just makes the process a little bit more tolerable. And lastly is that be open to different opportunities, and of course it's depending on your sort of personal circumstances. So when I was applying for academic jobs, in academia, in the field of anthropology, there's not a whole lot of jobs to begin with, particularly in tenure track position. And because my dissertation work was about Buddhism in Vietnam too, and so it's again another very small field. And so I had to sort of extend my search a little bit out there and look at positions in Asia, in Europe, or in any other places that you feel comfortable moving to. And so there might be other places outside of the US that you might find appealing. Now, so that's some of the sort of small little advices that I have for job application. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more now about sort of my experience so far working in a research institution. So as the institute where I worked at, as the title suggests, I mean, so we study a lot of things related to war, genocide, and the Holocaust, and so a very cheerful set of topic during this pandemic. And I am part of a research team for a project called Bones of Contention, and the project aim is to sort of understand the process of war debt identifications and post-war reconciliation in Vietnam. And so we look at the intersections of the use of DNA technology versus using spiritual forensics to search for dead body, and how those technology affect the way that people reconcile in the post-war context. It's kind of funny because originally when I was thinking about sort of when I enter into academia in the first place, my interest was actually to become a teaching scholar at a small liberal arts college. And sort of life has a different plan for me, I suppose. And so now I'm being pushed in a research institutions. And it actually has been a very sort of rewarding experience so far. So one of the perks of working in a research-intensive institution is that you don't have to teach. And I think if your interest is in doing a lot of the research and trying to get publication out, then it is actually one of the very nice sort of place to do it. But also when you work in a research institution, most of the people in here are very involved in research projects, and so you do get that nice sort of exchange of ideas and conversations that draw a lot of us towards academia. And one of the things about this institutions is that it's located in the Netherlands, and so I haven't lived in Europe before. It's my first time ever living in Europe. And so it has been a very sort of charming experience, just sort of moving myself to a different locations after over a decade living in the US. But at the same time, it's the European system, as sort of many of you know, is that it depending on the country that you're at, you might not have the exact same tenure track systems that you have in the US. And part of the disadvantage of that is that you will find people jumping from different research institutions to research institutions before hopefully they might be able to land in a much more sort of permanent position. And one of the things about jumping from research institution is that you also have to apply for a lot of research grants, and it is challenging, and I think in some way I was hoping to applying for research grants during my graduate school was actually one of the more painful experiences that I ever had in my life, and I think now I'm on the track where I have to do a little bit more of that. But at the same time, it is one of those processes where it is painful, but you learn a lot doing it. You learn to articulate your thoughts in different ways. You learn to appeal to different audiences, and you learn to sharpen your ideas a lot more. And so maybe in the next few years, I'll report back how I feel about the whole process. But so far, I feel very blessed and very lucky that I'd be able to work in this in the institute that I'm working at the moment. And I'm open to any questions that you might have about job applications or anything. Thank you.
You're muted, sorry.
Hey, welcome to Zoom Live. Well, first, thanks to Dr. Nguyen for those interesting insights. Like I was just saying that I'm also interested to hear more about your experience in a more like research-centered institution and less on the teaching side of academia. So fascinating. Great. Thank you so much. And again, we're inviting everybody to write in the chat introductions, etc., and questions. We'll get back to that. But let's proceed to our third speaker today. So we have Dr. Jessica Soedirgo, who will speak to us about finding postdoc positions, as well as other related, really interesting, exciting topics in our graduate student life. Take it away, Dr. Jessica.
Thank you. I do want to sort of preface this by when I was invited, I was kind of like, I don't even really know if I have a lot of advice, because in many ways, I think we all know that the job market is really bad. And I would say that 90%, if not more, it's not really who you are as a scholar. So there's a lot of luck involved in terms of fit, how many jobs, that you are plausibly hireable for. And then I also think that there's a lot of privilege involved. So like the privilege to actually be on the job market, the financial privilege it takes to be able to move from adjunct positions or postdoc positions like every year sometimes for that perfect job. And also the privilege to be able to move at all if you can. Sometimes you can get lucky and get a job, that suits your geographical constraints, but a lot of people also don't have that. So I do want to acknowledge the role of luck and the role of privilege. And also just want to sort of talk about my failures and to just be transparent about that, because I think it can normalize, a lot of the difficult feelings of being on the job market. So I was on the job market, I think comparatively for a short time, but still felt impossibly long. I was on the job market from August 2018 to basically the beginning of September 2020. So that's basically 24 months almost to the day. I applied for the Georgetown postdoc at the beginning of August 2020, was offered it 2 weeks later, and then 2 weeks later had my job talk at the University of Amsterdam. And then a week later, I got offered the job. Those were the only 2 job offers I ever got. A lot of people get multiple offers. I got 2. And then, so there's a lot of rejection in there. So in the 2018, I just did the math because I was curious because I wanted to share this. But from 2018 to the 2019 job market, I applied to 12 postdocs and 28 tenure track jobs. From 2019 to 2020, including the summer of 2020, I applied to 14 postdocs and 37 tenure track jobs. From that number of applications, I was shortlisted for postdocs 3 times and didn't get an offer. I was video interviewed 3 times for a tenure track job. Amsterdam went straight to the shortlist, so there was no video interview. Sometimes that happens, though I'm finding maybe it's kind of rare for that. And then I had 2 shortlist interviews, so campus visits. I didn't get one and I got the other. And actually the first one, I thought I did much better in terms of performance than my Amsterdam one. I actually after the Amsterdam interview, I cried because I thought I did really terribly. And then there's also the question of fit. So sometimes you just get lucky. So the Georgetown postdoc was looking for someone to work on religion, ethnicity, and conflict in Southeast Asia, which is exactly what I do. And the Amsterdam job, they were looking for people working on violence and security. And I didn't know this then, but the only person at the department who kind of was working on Indonesia, not fully, was leaving. And so they didn't have anyone studying Indonesia at the university, which is a really big deal for a university. in the Netherlands. So I just kind of wanted to unpack that, because to show that there's so much you can't control. I couldn't control the fact that someone who studied Indonesia was gonna leave the university, and so they really needed someone to be able to teach that. And so that's a long spiel, but I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that. I will say that there are parts where you do have control, and even though it doesn't feel like a lot, and sometimes it doesn't matter, I guess you just want to maximize where you do have control. A lot of people have sort of mentioned some of these, so I'll just race through. So of course, starting early. Myself, it took me about a month to just write the drafts of my materials. I actually thought it wouldn't be that long, but it actually takes a very long time. Again, look at other people's materials to learn how to structure your own. Later, just like Alex and other people, I'll put in my email, and I'm happy to send you a copy of my cover letter. But again, this takes time. Interfolio, I think, is extremely useful, so get to know how to use it. I would also say that there are times when you might want to get your letter writer to tailor your letter if it's like a job that you really, really want and are particularly good for. I think one of the mistakes that I made when asking for tailoring was that I didn't specify what I wanted my letter writers to focus on. I was just kind of like, hey, please tailor my letter. But I think it's helpful to be clear about what you want them to emphasize and the skills that you want them to draw out in your letters. In particular, postdoc applications take a really long time, and I think are a lot less, it's a bit easier to customize tenure track job applications. Like once you have the materials done, there's only, there's certain things, it'll take maybe like 2 hours to sort of tailor the cover letter, but postdocs just take a lot more time because they have different requirements. And so as someone said before, ask people that that have actually gotten it. Another thing is when you get to the phone interview or Zoom interview, make sure you start working on your job talk immediately. The first time I got like a phone interview was like, I said, oh, I'm not gonna even get a campus visit. So like, why even bother? But I did. And that was really, really stupid of me not to actually start the moment that I got the phone interview. So just prepare your job talk in advance. Often you don't have a lot of time between video interview invite and campus visit invite, like 2 weeks. And so you don't really want us to scramble at that point. Do several mock job talks if you have the time. I did my job talk for Amsterdam over Zoom, and that was like the benefit of that. Meredith and Marianne were some of the people who watched my job talk and gave me incredible advice. But for that Amsterdam job, I did 3 mock job interviews. Also, for my PhD granting institution, one with regional specialists, and then people who were methodologically divergent from me because I wanted to make sure that I could anticipate the questions. It's awkward to ask people to watch you. It feels like you're incurring a lot of debts, but I think that people want to help you, and and if there's any time that people can really help you, it's during this time. So, do the best you can. And I would say maybe about a week in advance, stop changing your talk, just know it, and then anticipate any questions you might get. I think there's like a tendency to want to just keep perfecting it, but eventually just kind of, this is how it's going to be. I'm just going to practice. And the one thing I wish I'd done for my first campus visit, turned out fine, but I wish that I feel like we don't emphasize the interview preparation as much as the job talk, because a lot of times the focus is on the job talk because that's like the most public thing. But having, sat on a search committee and gone through the process only twice, but I feel like we don't put enough preparation for that. So the professor has a list of really great questions. I didn't bring it with me because I just moved, but that would be a really good start. And I would also say ask people to practice with you. So just as you do a mock job interview, do mock interviews. So 4 people mocked interviews with me, and it was super, super helpful. In particular, there were questions that went during the mock interview. I was like, who's going to ask me this question? And it was like the 3rd question someone asked. So it was like, what are the resources you'll need to succeed as an early career scholar? And I was like, who's going to ask this question? It's like not about me, it's about them. And that was actually asked. And yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. I hope that's somewhat helpful. I know it's a really tough job market out there, and sometimes you get lucky and sometimes, you don't, but I hope that everyone gets lucky here in terms of, that sounded bad, but in terms of the job market. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica, and really for offering also like sharing some of your application materials. I think that those will really be very helpful for our colleagues here in the room who are thinking about going on the job market this season. So again, welcome everybody. If you're just logged in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and also if you have questions, we're collecting them for now, and then we'll get back to your questions later on. Our final speaker for today is Dr. Mary Ann Mendoza, and she has a PhD in political science from UC Irvine, and she's an assistant professor of political science at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. So take it away, Dr. Mary Ann.
Thanks, Nerv. So it's really nice to see a lot of people in the chat who study colonial Philippines. I'm really excited to have people to cite. So I teach at a state university that is very teaching focused. And so a lot of my comments about the job market will be geared towards kind of the teaching positions. I have my email in the chat in case anyone has questions about materials, or if you just want feedback on your specific materials or your teaching demo and anything like that. I'll kind of go through stuff in terms of the different components of a teaching specific package for when you're applying. So I think it's very important when you're applying to teaching positions to understand the place that you're applying. Now, naturally, when we think of being on the job market, at least in my experience, being at an R1, as most of us come from, you're kind of taught about the research fit, making sure that you're able to demonstrate your links to the department, what gaps they don't have in terms of research. You should apply a similar lens to when you think about teaching, right? What courses can you offer in terms of region or topic that they are not offering? Or alternatively, what courses are they offering that are taught by non-tenure line faculty? In my experience, and especially within the Cal State system in my department, more than half of our courses are taught by adjunct professors. And so it's important to kind of think about, for a lot of departments, they want to streamline and think about offering more courses by full-time faculty. And so kind of think about your fit in terms of teaching, and don't be afraid to expand a little. So obviously don't say you can teach every single thing, don't lie, right? But there are some kind of things. So for example, in my experience, I was putting on my applications, I can teach courses on Southeast Asia. And my advisor, being a European scholar, was like, no, you can teach a course on Asia. And I was like, we're not all the same, but in terms of thinking about it, he was like, but if you had to, you could. Right? And this is one of those things where it's kind of, especially in teaching departments that don't have a large faculty, you will be asked sometimes to be a lot more flexible. So right now I'm teaching a course on East Asia. So I'm learning alongside my students. It's a great experience, but it's something that I could do with the amount of prep. I will never be prepared to teach IPE. So, you have to have certain boundaries in terms of that, but that is something to think about. It also matters what the department calls themselves. For me, being in political science, some departments I applied to were called Department of Government or Department of International Affairs or History and Political Science. And so those mean things. And it's important to kind of think about when you are when you are asked about what you can teach, to consider kind of your role in departments that are called different things. It's cheesy, but often this question of why did you apply tends to be one of the first questions you get, either for research or non. And if it doesn't come up in the teaching ones, in your one-on-one interviews and meetings with people, they're going to want to hear that. And it is very important that you understand the department you're applying to, the school you're applying to. After I accepted the job, a colleague in my department had said when they're going through the letters and the materials, he word for word said, if the applicant doesn't understand what we're about, they immediately go in like the non-considered pile. So I find that in a lot of these teaching focused schools, they really do take to heart the tone of your letter, whether or not it sounds like you're a good fit, and like Dat was saying earlier, sometimes life has other plans in terms of if you're going to be at a research focused place or a teaching focused place. But sometimes in the way that you write your materials, it can be evident where you are a best fit. So don't think about, oh, I have to apply to these teaching jobs because I need to get a job. Yes, that's important. But if you're not going to be happy teaching 4 courses a semester, which is my load 4-4, or 3-3 if you don't have if you have a course release, that's something that you don't want, right? You don't want to apply to a place that you're not going to be happy doing a bunch of teaching and perhaps less research, to kind of the corollary to that. When you're working on your letter, you know, you want to swap the order. Start with your teaching sections first. Consider having a cohesive message between your letter and your statement. I would recommend not copy pasting a paragraph from your teaching philosophy into the letter, just because they're going to be reading that and they'll see that. And often that's kind of a subtle signal that, like, oh, this person doesn't have much to say about their teaching, so they're kind of copy pasting their materials, versus a person who's, you know, you still talk about the same things, be cohesive, but maybe you use a more impactful example in your cover letter, since that's the first thing they look at. And from that impactful example, then they'll look at your teaching statement that expands upon that. Change the names of the courses you offer to teach to fit their catalog. Again, considering what gaps they have. For the interviews, consider what courses you would add. I was taken off guard by this question because I was like, I can offer whatever you need. And they're like, well, what would you like to offer? And so often there is room at these institutions for you to teach a specialized course or add to the catalog. So that's something to think about. If you don't use social media, I personally found a lot of people willing on academic Twitter to weigh in on my teaching statements. And again, being at an R1, my committee could only do so much in terms of giving me feedback on the statements. But faculty at small liberal arts colleges or teaching institutions who often don't have graduate students, they were very willing to just kind of give me feedback on my materials, tell me what sounded weird, tell me what sounded kind of or needed more elaboration. If you are not familiar with teaching jargon, don't shoehorn those in because individuals at those institutions will understand. So for example, if you say that you are using a student-focused pedagogy, but then you never talk about the impact of your teaching on students, they can kind of see that you're shoehorning in the jargon. So talk about your teaching honestly, talk about it deliberately, but don't feel the need to use teaching pedagogy jargon if it's not something that's familiar with you. And if you do use it, kind of make sure you're using it in a contextually appropriate way, right? Think about this in terms of the committee doesn't know much about you other than what you put in those statements. And so you kind of want to be mindful of, even if you don't intend it to come off as, indifferent or whatever, you don't want that to be the impression that you give them. When it comes to your teaching portfolio, I've noticed a lot of people in the chat are early in their program, so that's awesome. I would recommend saving your course evals or your TA evals every semester. So that way, when you are putting together your teaching portfolio, you kind of just have it all in one place. I didn't realize that until pretty late. And so kind of like what Alex Tai was saying is you start early. And so for me, I saved everything as a separate PDF file and just kind of merged depending on if they wanted my statement together with syllabi or evals or anything else. If you can, it can be helpful to include your eval scores and then a comparison with the department's averages or the university's averages, if they're good. Obviously, if they're not super good, then you can include them if you're showing an improvement in your teaching or if you want to address that. But it is helpful, and that was something that I saw several graduate students in cohorts above me doing. It's just for basis of comparison is helpful. In terms of teaching experience, when you're talking about this in your statement, I highly recommend brainstorming your teaching philosophy. I was very fortunate, and Jess knows this. I had a lot of teaching experience in graduate school, much to the chagrin of my committee, I will acknowledge. But some of it was just I needed to pay bills. And so I had the benefit and the fortune of being able to talk about my TA experience and my experience as instructor of record. And so you want to kind of think about your teaching experience, and when you think about what examples to use, you want to talk about it in terms of why you chose those things. So being deliberate. How does this fit into your approach to students and your approach to teaching? Harmonizing kind of your decisions about assessment, approach, and activities. This can be really hard to do, just kind of writing cold. So this is why I recommend just brainstorming. Jess mentioned the professors in. They have a really great template for things to think about and kind of honing in on. Sometimes, like I mentioned, you get asked about what to add. When you get to the teaching demo, this is more about your ability to I think, cultivate student engagement and less about how well you know the content. And so kind of, I would recommend don't focus so much on, oh, I have to cover XYZ because you can't teach a course on this unless you include these people. And I think it's important to think about how are you cultivating student engagement. It's not an exercise in pontificating. For these, teaching demos, they want to see, how do you get students to participate? What do you do when students don't speak up? Or how comfortable are you with silences when it comes to doing a teaching demo? I think a common thing that people do is they'll kind of have students have either a series of questions that they discuss in pairs and then the larger group, or a series of discussions that they then do in a group. So if you are kind of thinking, how would I cultivate student engagement, that's one way. I also would suggest thinking outside the box and consider simulations. So political science education journals have some discussion about different simulations you can run. And so, for example, my colleague in American politics, he had his students in the teaching demo take a sample voting rights test. And the questions were super hard. And it drove his point home of, this is kind of the barriers people had to voting before the Voting Rights Act. And so sometimes, if you're like me, worried that students won't participate in the ways that you want them to, or they won't say what you want them to during your teaching demo, you can think about simulations. And you can really get creative with those. You can have worksheets, you can guide them, have clear instructions. And then the last thing I'll talk about is, what if you have no teaching experience, which is a very likely thing sometimes, and that's okay. It's not your fault. Like Jess is saying, there's a limited number of positions everywhere. If you've TA'd, that counts. Don't downplay what you've done as a TA, but also don't, overly glorify it within reason. If you have no TA experience or no teaching experience and you still want to apply, I would recommend that you think about what has worked for you as a student and what hasn't. Be very clear about, I would do these things because I'm motivated by these reasons in my teaching. I want my classroom to be like this. Therefore, I do these things. I use these assessments, right? And kind of have a consistency about that. I would say, overall, you want that harmony between your statement and your letter. I was able to harmonize it with my research as well, since I work on colonial education. Sometimes you can't harmonize it with your research, and that's okay. But overall, I think the main takeaways should be, really understand the department you're applying to as the first hurdle. And then when you're doing the demo and the teaching, kind of cultivating that engagement and helping the people interviewing you understand that you're not just applying here because you love teaching. Yes, that is super important, but take it a step beyond. I love teaching, and therefore I do these things to, enhance student retention, or to mentor students, or to bring students into research. That also tends to be a really important thing. So if you love research and teaching, I would recommend that's also something to mention. And then I think the last thing I'll end with, the question that threw me off the most was for an interview with the small liberal arts. They straight up were like, we're a small department, we don't have funding, how will you pay for your research? And so sometimes that is something to think about when you're applying to these positions, is what your research plan will be. Often I was told to prep, what's your 5 to 10 year trajectory? When is your book coming out? What's your agenda? Instead, I got asked, how are you going to pay for this? Because we can't pay for it. So just a question to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Marian Mendoza. Again, like all of our speakers today, provided and offered so much generous advice, and really a very comprehensive and also very specific and detailed. So I'm really hoping, when I was a PhD student, I wish I have all this wealth of information and knowledge from our colleagues here in the panel. So now we will segue into our Q&A. So again, feel free to either raise your digital hand if you have a question that you want to ask. Someone already dropped their question in the chat, and I will get into that question in a minute. But I just wondering, I'll just start as a moderator, and I'll also invite Professor Weiss here to ask questions too for our speakers. I'm wondering, because it's a pandemic, what are the lessons that you can offer to our graduate students in the way they can, leverage their experience throughout this pandemic when they are getting ready to apply for either postdoc positions or tenure track positions or research positions or even NGO positions, knowing that during the pandemic, there's a lot of delays and pauses, right, in our research and teaching activities, grant applications, etc. What would be a good way to kind of incorporate that into your job application materials? I invite everybody, anyone from our panel here.
I saw Marianne. I mean, first of all, it must be an extraordinarily difficult time to be a PhD candidate. During a pandemic, especially those of you who expected to be doing fieldwork. So I don't have a lot of suggestions in terms of what to do with your research. I've been thinking about it, but I don't think I have concrete answers. But perhaps one thing to me jump off of one of Marianne's points about not being able to, maybe not having teaching experience. I think one of the benefits of being in this pandemic is that a lot of classrooms are online. And so if you're feeling like you want to beef up your teaching portfolio, it might be help. I'm sure every single professor in this room would agree that having someone guest lecture is, would be a very nice break. And so that might be something to consider if you're feeling like, hey, maybe my teaching isn't that strong. And you can also ask, in exchange for your guest lecturing, for the professor to actually evaluate you, and you can maybe put that into your teaching portfolio. So that's maybe one idea to take advantage of this time.
Great, thank you so much. That was a wonderful suggestion from Jessica. Does anyone in our panel as well want to contribute or add?
I think separate from that, more broadly, it seems like there's a greater acceptance for collaborating online, mostly because we are forced to. But I think in terms of if you've been on the fence about reaching out to someone about collaborating on something or being involved in a project, even if they are not in the same vicinity as you, there just seems to be a greater norm of reaching out to someone to schedule a Zoom meeting, to say like, I'm interested in this. Do you want to collaborate on something? I'm interested in your work on XYZ. I, as a graduate student, I would be honest, cold emailing people or just kind of asking if I can be part of a project or taking initiative in those sense was not my strong suit. And in retrospect, I've seen, colleagues who did kind of have a little bit more of that tougher skin or just kind of getting over that initial, I don't know if I'm bothering someone type thing, tend to collaborate a lot more. And again, especially I think with Twitter in particular, I've seen just kind of people interacting on there and kind of finding common interests. So be it for panels or even just in terms of research. So I think right now with everyone still online and kind of accustomed to it and on their emails, it may be a really good time to send that email or reach out to that professor or fellow graduate student somewhere else that you've been meaning to reach out to see if they're working on something you want to collaborate, or if you specifically have an idea and you want feedback on it, or if you think some partnership could be made. I think now is a good time to be able to reach out when everyone's on Zoom.
Yes, wonderful, and that's also like in that spirit from Marianne's recommendations. Again, like we're inviting everybody to put their affiliation, and feel free to like drop in your email address if you want to reach out to everybody as well in the room today. Does Dr. Dat or Alex have any additional comments on the pandemic and how we can maximize this time?
I mean, I'm kind of like a step out of academia, so I'm working, outside of it. And since I moved here, I've still, my room is my office. I've been to my actual office twice just to get my computer and whatnot. But we communicate. Everything is online, right? Work, right? And quote unquote, very important work online. Everything, right? So I mean, as graduate student, we all experience, probably teaching online, all these experience, dealing with students, dealing with faculties, doing online. so this is a positive in a way in how you can present yourself to the place that you're applying to, because they are looking to see if you can adjust to this thing, because it might be a long-term thing. It's not just, we can go back soon or anything like that. I don't see, it's not on our schedule as to when we are going back yet, where I'm at right now. So last 2 weeks ago, we had someone who interviewed for the job, and the question we had to ask them is like, how are you going to do this? Are you up for it? Because mentally, a lot of people are not ready for it. They want the physical interaction and the presence and whatnot. So yeah, take it to your advantage. Make it and demonstrate that. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you so much. Dat, do you have additional comments before we move on to the questions?
Yeah, sure. I just want to sort of reiterate what Jessica and Marianne and Alex had already said, which is, I think I personally also trying to sort of figure out the whole situations and sort of navigate it too, because I don't think that any of us really have a good answer of how to do these kind of things. And particularly with research, it's almost possible to do field research at this point in time. And so there has to, we have to sort of adapt and I guess gives way to certain other ways of doing sort of ethnography or interviews or something of that sort. But that, I think the other thing though is that, the online environment does give you the advantage of being able to collaborate with other people that you haven't been able to do that before. And I think because everything is online, if you are interested in sort of creating a kind of an online footprint, you can definitely do that at this point in time. Sort of having a record of things that you have collaborated with, events, things like that. And I also have seen colleagues who also sort of taking this time to sort of potentially work on sort of certain articles and submitted it sort of for publication and things like that. Not that everyone is always up for it at every moment in time, but this is also, could be one of those time in your graduate career where you might consider just submitting something and then have it on your CV, right? And I don't know, so something of that sort. But it is a difficult situation for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dat. Professor Meredith Wise, do you have any questions to our panelists before we move on to our audience's questions?
I have a couple, and I have to say this has been some of the most spot-on advice on job searching, grant searching, all of those considerations that I've heard collected in any one place. So I hope we can, put this on our website and have all my students listen to it. But I think that the main questions I would have would be, first, especially since most of you are new to positions, one of the things that I recall long ago was a shock to me was how little I could get done, and what I was used to thinking of as getting done in my first year or 2 years in a position. And unfortunately, that wasn't just my first position, it was every position that I started. And so I'm curious if you have any, I know people right now, grad students who are listening, are just thinking about getting to that position, but if you have any tips for like, looking past that, what's helped you in these initial phases of, the positions you're in, including if you've thought about, or if you maybe have heard from others, or your own experience, when do you think about if, and how do you think about if you might want to move elsewhere, especially if you're in a postdoc, like at what point to start thinking about going through that awful, grueling process of applications again? The only other question I would put out there would be to ask, I completely agree with what a number of you said about networking and building networks. Collaborating on research can be tricky just because, most of us who are supposedly more senior, it doesn't mean we have, funds for research assistants or whatever else. We don't want to exploit grad students. And we may be used to thinking of our projects as solo initiatives, which is, how we start off. So, but, if you have, I think it was Marianne had suggested, if you have a project to propose, that can be great. But also, I'm just curious, like how, for me, the most useful networking opportunities were not so much big conferences. I mean, those have been very important to me throughout my career, but also smaller workshops. So Nerv mentioned this one in Stockholm when we started, but for me, it was, there's one I was invited to as a graduate student in Leiden for an edited volume that never happened, but the workshop itself was this great opportunity. So I always kind of push people to do, edited volumes, chapters in those may not be high value on a CV, but it's such a great way to meet people and get to know who's in your field and get known as a good colleague who'll submit things on time and all of that. But what other tips do you have? Like what other ways, especially but not exclusively during a pandemic, have you found that have been useful for building your network and making sure that, yeah, when people see your application, they at least have some familiarity with the name, which sadly does actually matter.
Great. Yeah, wonderful questions. Thank you so much. So anyone from our panelists, first year transition from grad school to the job, and also networking experiences in smaller workshops, etc. While our Marianne, I see you unmute.
I think something that I found maybe sort of as a big culture shock when I started was just, I mean, maybe it's not surprising, but just the amount of teaching prep that I had in my position. I mean, granted, I am at a teaching focused university, but even as someone who really enjoys teaching, just I didn't realize how much, prepping 2 or 3 new courses in a semester would be. So I would say for those of you who, as you're thinking about transitioning, if you're going to be starting at a teaching focused or even just any professor institution, consider how many new course preparations you are doing at a time. If you have the opportunity to do like an intro and a upper div or lower div, try to kind of distribute that out. I tried to, but I did both my intros in the first semester. So then by the second one, it was all upper div. So think about when they're asking you, what will you teach, right? Once you've accepted the offer, and when, kind of think about spacing it out in terms of just the prep that you'll be doing. I also found, so I never did this in graduate school, but my university we do this kind of like writing hour thing on Zoom, where it's just people log in at this time. We commit that we're going to be here at this time. We don't really talk to each other during, but we'll do like Pomodoros. And so that accountability has been helpful. So scheduling time in for research, which as a graduate student is a good practice. But if you are definitely transitioning to a position that's teaching heavy or anything, I think really scheduling time to do the research is helpful, since your teaching time is scheduled, your meeting times are scheduled. And so it can be really helpful to schedule that time in. I know people have different theories about which one you schedule in first, but I think just scheduling time in for research is a really helpful thing. But also, like Meredith was saying, sometimes you just embrace that you can't do everything all at once. You do your best. I'm finishing my first year, and in the last semester, I have not touched my research as much, but I've been doing disproportionately a lot more teaching prep. So I think kind of understanding that balance is helpful. In terms of Nerf's question or Meredith's question about networks, I cold emailed people. Sometimes I would just email people to tell them, I just finished reading your book or your article, and like, I don't have anything intelligent to say about it, but I just wanted to thank you for writing it, either because, it helped me think about my work in a different way, or it sheds light on, a marginalized community that I research that doesn't get as much airtime. Obviously send genuine emails like that, not just like copy pasting. But I think it can be helpful sometimes, especially when, in my experience as a graduate student, I always felt like I didn't have feedback for someone's article or book, but I just really appreciated the clarity or something else about it. And I think that can be helpful too, in terms of networking, because sometimes people will ask, what do you work on? And then you can kind of strike up a conversation over email that way, if it's not through a conference.
Thank you,
I would.
Marianne and Jessica.
Oh, sorry. I didn't listen to the order. I just jumped in there interrupting. And so I'm literally like 3 weeks into my assistant professor role, so I can't really say anything. But it seems, and so I haven't done any research either. I just kind of was like, I'm just going to focus on teaching. I know it's going to stress me out to do that. But one thing that different systems have different things. You can't really, but negotiating maybe a course release when you get the offer is probably sort of standard. And sometimes not everyone knows that you can do that. And I think it's quite expected, but it's important to just say like, hey, I can't do that. And it might, I've also found that finding your allies in the department, or at least figuring out like who might be helpful in helping maybe reduce prep. So, you know, maybe there's a course you've taught before. Can you ask like, you know, can I teach this course that I already have material for? Or, you know, maybe there's, so the one thing that I asked was, you know, can I teach a master's course and the bachelor's course on the same topic? So that, you know, maybe the material's a bit different, but you can just add some readings for the master's course. And so just reducing, like Marianne said, your teaching prep. And then one thing that I do in terms of research is that every Sunday night, I email 2 people that are about what I need to do this week. And then on Friday, I report back. So yeah, it's kind of this like guilt-induced, like I'm not good at writing groups, but I think just having to account for your time. And, you know, often I don't get everything done, but it's also helpful for you to know what's a realistic expectation. In terms of networking, you know, I think I miss conferences like a lot, in-person conferences, but I also think that even though online conferences are not as fun, I do think that there is something to be said, at least about, you know, forming panels and having your discussants actually read your work, you know, that still is there, and you don't have the like dinners or coffees after. But I think it's obviously about just putting yourself out there. It's really awkward and nerve-wracking. And I know that some like CREG, you know, there's the Southeast Asia Research Group, they have conferences, and there's still like some sort of social breakout groups that you can still join, even though it might be awkward in this kind of environment. But academics are all awkward, so in person or online, you know, it's the same thing.
Thank you, Jessica. Great. Okay, so we're accepting questions now. So if that or Alex have anything to add on to those questions, or should we move on to the questions being posed to us by our audience? Yeah, let's just move on. All right, so we have Bonnie Tran posted the question on the chat, and I'm gonna recognize that question first, and then we'll call in Mohammed, who's raising his hand currently right now. So Bonnie Tran's question was, Bonnie is interested to know if there are fellowships for people like Bonnie, who have a master's but no PhD, older professional and non-US citizen, curious to learn more about fellowship opportunities. I'm guessing like research fellowship opportunities, and I'm guessing in the US, because he mentioned he's a non-US citizen. Does anyone have additional resources that Bonnie or similar question, you know, people, graduate students who may be interested in this kind of opportunity? My thought, and while we wait for our panelists to think about that question, and perhaps Meredith also can add into that, my thought would be really looking into if you're looking for the US related jobs, like Indeed.com, if you create a keyword for visiting fellowship, research fellowship, you can like receive email notifications of this job postings that are, you know, funneled through the search engines. That's how I found my job, actually, through Indeed.com, and I find it very useful. But you can also, I imagine you can also, again, like what our speakers have mentioned, cold email institutions where you want to be affiliated with. Email network, professors, scholars, follow the author that moved you, right? And then introduce yourself, and perhaps there will be opportunities that are not advertised yet, but can be created for your interest. So that would be my quick response to that. But again, like I open it up to our panelists and to Meredith.
The one thing I would add, which might be an option, so think tanks are growing globally, and a lot of those, having a graduate degree is important for the research skills and the knowledge base, but not necessarily a PhD, depending on the institution. So that may be a great way, and gives you the option. Those used to be much more concentrated in the US than they are now. It's a hugely growing area across Asia as well. The other possibility are sort of academic administration positions connected with, for instance, Centers for Southeast Asian Studies, especially since you know that you have research librarian experience, and that can be particularly valuable for these centers. Again, those are positions for which one may have a PhD, one may not have a PhD. The core is having some concentrated knowledge on a region, knowledge that's relevant to the job. But that also would open up the possibility often of interacting with students, perhaps teaching a class if you wanted to do so. So those sorts of non-traditional academic careers may be a good option and are not limited to any one country.
Thank you, Meredith. Great. So does anyone in our panel want to chime in, or should we move on to Mohammed's question? Yeah. Fellowships. Okay. All right. And we'll get back to discussions, I'm sure, later on. But Mohammed, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and your question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. You can call me Salihin, by the way. So I'm a second-year PhD student in the Department of Political Science in UBC. And throughout this sharing, thank you, by the way, for the sharing from the panelists. I think a lot of great advice for us to keep track of. But I was thinking, as we went through the sharing, I was wondering what the effect of the experience with COVID would have more concretely in terms of like the job search and the expectations of departments moving forward. Specifically, I'm thinking about when Jessica was talking about the funding question, and when Marianne was talking about the expectations that departments have on how prospective candidates should be thinking about the teaching. Do you think that departments moving forward would be thinking more about how prospective candidates will approach their research to better adapt it to situations such as COVID in the future? So maybe if they will be more inclined to look at candidates who are able to flexibly pivot their research towards research that's not so affected by the pandemic, or for example, if they're able to flexibly move towards online teaching, which is what a lot of us are experiencing right now, right? Do you think the COVID pandemic has had that effect on the expectations of departments moving forward, or do you think we're going to move back to the normal situation as it was before? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Salihin, for your question. And we invite our panelists here to respond to Salihin's question. Yes, Jessica. Feel free to unmute yourself now.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the question, Salihin. I would say that's probably the position of those of us who are in tenure track or tenured positions to sort of remember the pandemic. I think, it seems that we probably have to play an active role if we're on hiring committees to be like, you can expect someone who's, to do the kind of field work that maybe people before the pandemic, like I did 15 months of field work. That's impossible now. And so I think we just have to, I don't know if if there's gonna be a move, but I think it's probably up to those of us who are privileged enough to have jobs to kind of push for that. And so thanks for the reminder. I think it's really important. So I don't really have anything else to say other than that.
Yeah, I think if you are if you're planning to be on the job market in the next year or two, I think it's definitely very unfortunate, because if you're planning to do field work, a lot of people have had that timeline interrupted. I have really close friends who are in their 4th or 5th year who have been unable to go on field work. So it's kind of, they're in like this holding position, not knowing, when they'll be able to. I think definitely what Jess has said is correct. In terms of expectations, I think it'll be kind of very department specific. In terms of what that means for expectations about the application for research positions, I think it depends. For teaching positions, in terms of the impact of COVID, at least from my experience, I've seen some teaching departments are talking about keeping what's called kind of like a hybrid or high flex course, where you're teaching in person, but you have a department set up like camera to be able to record or live stream to students who can't come in. So I've seen that discussion a bit at my own university and other teaching universities about maintaining that for accessibility for students, just because there's a lot of other valid reasons that students may not be able to come to class outside of a pandemic, even when things are over. So I've seen that in terms of teaching. That seems to be one impact that may stay. I have not seen a lot of universities freezing the tenure clock for anyone. I've seen maybe like initially it was they'll freeze it for a year, or they'll take that into account for tenure application or for when you're processing your tenure file. But I have, again, yet to see anything about a long-term thing for people. So if any of you are on the job market or are starting positions in the next year or so, I have yet to kind of see a discussion about the long-term impact that a year of a pandemic or a year or two of a pandemic has on your productivity in the first 5 years. So in that sense, I haven't seen it. But I think it is worth in either in your materials or in your one-on-one interviews when you're on the job market to contextualize that, of saying, here's the research decisions that I made that were partly a function of being unable to travel, or partly a function of the places that I wanted to go to, it was unethical to go. So I do have some colleagues who they could go on fieldwork now, or they could slip by on fieldwork or whatever it is, but they've chosen not to because it's unethical, since the areas that they're going to are having larger outbreaks. So I think being able to contextualize some of your graduate experience in terms of the impact COVID has can be helpful in some of your materials as well.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Mary and Jessica here too. Is that I think even when it comes to research funding agency, they themselves have also been extremely careful about asking to the future applicants to submit plan A, plan B, plan C, all of that, just to make sure that the research question have been thought out and can be adapted depending on the COVID situation. And I think at most, I wouldn't say at most, I don't know about other academic institutions, but for example, at my research institute, for example, people do come around with the understanding that because it's COVID, and so there's a lot of ethical question and there's a lot of logistical challenges to doing research, and so people are also a little bit more understandings in terms of the fact that you may not make as much progress as you had hoped, or you have to change your methodologies, or you shift your data set a little bit in order to fit with the situation. And I think that if you are in a position where you are still developing your research questions, do take that into account and figure out a way so that you can be able to collect data sort of in multiple ways possible. So not everything has to be sort of in person all the time. Yeah.
Great. So thank you so much for the responses from our panelists. Again, we're inviting everybody. If you have another question to ask, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. While we're waiting, I actually want to invite the panelists. Do you have a question to your fellow panelists, with based on their experience, etc., other challenges that they're facing, or some ways to celebrate, as Alex has mentioned? Curious if you have other questions to your fellow panelists.
I mean, I don't have a question, but I maybe I would like to add something to Meredith's question, or and some of your answer. Speaking from someone who's kind of like out of academia too, that still want to maintain a root, a foot in academia and do research and publish and things like that. I think that eventually will be a lot of us, right? The job market is not there for all of us to be professors, assistant professor, or whatnot. And eventually we have to go accept other jobs, and some you don't fall in love with, some you do, like what I'm doing right now is very close to what my research is. So I'm satisfied with that anyway, right? But I still want to maintain a foot in academia. So how do I do that? How do I still maintain connection with people in academia, to publish, to review books, to do projects and whatnot? So it's very important to do that, to connect with folks. So for example, right now I'm doing my 8 to 5 jobs and taking my sometimes you see I turn off the screen is because I'm also babysitting my son, for example. But I'm also collaborating with Oregon to do a volume on Vietnamese American history. I'm collaborating with Irvine to do a volume on social history during the Vietnam War and things like that. And all these stuff are done online. We're doing all these interviews, with potential contributors and things like this. So, and then, journals are still, reaching out to me to review books and whatnot, attend conferences, So if you still want to be in touch with academia, like I still do, you can definitely find a way to do it and connect with folks. And who knows, maybe one day you decide to come back into academia. That might be, so maintaining that relationship is important. So I hope, I know COVID and all these stuff and the job market is not pleasant for a lot of us, but make it your best, right? In that way. So that would be my approach to it.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's really wonderful advice to like maintain an active research agenda, regardless of your current position, right? Like either you're in a think tank or teaching position, R1 university or NGO, etc. I think it's really good to be mindful of that, and that kind of like riffs off as well from Salihin's question about the earlier question about what do you do in your first year of teaching. I think like that's really the struggle when you're on your first year of teaching, transitioning from a graduate program to actual teaching, is how to maintain that active research agenda. And one lesson that I learned from one of my mentors in graduate school is to create a research syllabus, almost like a seminar syllabus for myself. So if you're in a semester term or like a quarter system, creating those kind of research syllabus per week that I set upon myself, what do I need to read this week, even if it's just like one chapter, or one article, and kind of like creating a research syllabus that is kind of according to the timeline of your semester of teaching, which is really difficult. Like I try to do it, but it always fail. Always like it doesn't happen anyway. But I think like just being mindful of like creating that research syllabus, I think is helpful. Jessica, your hand is up.
Actually, I think Alex just brought up a really important point that I had thought about and then just like forgot. So thank you. I think it's really exciting that you found that about the potential of non-academic jobs. And so I was wondering, Alex, if you could share a little bit about that process of how you made the transition from from the postdoc to finding a job, a non-academic job, because as of last year I was also making those considerations. So.
Yeah, I think the one thing is that we just have to. I think a lot of us, went into this whole process of being a graduate student in research, and we have a desire. We have to stay in academia and do research, teaching, and whatnot. But we also have to come to the reality of the nature of the business. And try to, and I think we need to acknowledge that early too, so that because by your 6th, 7th, 8th year, I see a lot of my friends being very depressed through graduate school, right? And that is not, that is very harmful. And so I told myself that you have to acknowledge the reality and be able and be willing to make that transition when need, because I don't have other choices in the way, because I have a family, and you guys mostly have other obligations. We all have obligations. We can't sit around and wait for that opportunity anymore. And also partly because, I was also going through the process of, applying to jobs and like all of us, in academic jobs. But then last year, I also had a medical scare that I had a heart attack while all this was happening, right? Because I was in a graduate school and just so thinking so much about all these stuff, all of us, it really takes its toll on all of us, right? And myself, I did. And then I came to a realization that, yeah, I'm trying to pursue this. I'm trying to be involved in academia, being able to share knowledge and facilitate all these stuff. But can I also do, are there other options aside from just being in the academia, right? And then I just realized, I just had a heart attack, and then, I've been here for 8 years, my kids and my wife and stuff. So why don't I just take myself to a different place at this particular moment, right? So I was sitting at my hospital bed, accepting this job, that I did, because I just needed a career change, right? And I think sometimes we need that, right? But then when I made that choice, I also committed myself that I will try to stay connected to what I love, which is research and being able to facilitate knowledge and image education. So when I still maintain all these connections with everybody else, I still propose projects, I still come up with projects to do. And I think that that is the thing that we have to speak to ourselves and convince ourselves to make that transition. Jobs are there outside of academia for us to apply, to look for, whether it's government jobs, whether it's private practices and whatnot. Just search out and you see that there are also other open doors that are relatable to what you do too. So, I'm a specialist on the Vietnam War. Now I'm working on the Vietnam. Right. So I think we need to train ourselves that it's not, there are also other options that we have to look at for what is best for us too, because physically, and I'm advising everyone here, I'm sharing that because I want all of us who are in graduate school and also in academia as a whole to take care of yourself. Most importantly, psychologically, but also physically, because and go get checkup and go get all these stuff. I didn't do that for years, and boom, it hit, and then it's sometimes too late, right? So that is my transition to what I'm doing right now.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing that. And we're glad that you recovered and you're joining us today. And I think if there's anything else that we also learned from this pandemic is to really prioritize our overall well-being as we pursue our projects, right, and other things that we're involved in. So I think that's very important. I see Meredith's hand is up, but I also just want to throw in a question to our panel here. Just speaking of and building upon the question of mental and emotional, physical health. And in New York, in this region, we're seeing a lot of anti-Asian, anti-API violence. And obviously for me personally, for people like me, it affects us, right? How can we continue working on and accomplishing our goals in an environment where there's a pandemic, where there's police brutality and murders, and where there is massive anti-Blackness and anti-Asian racialized violence. And I'm wondering, what are the tips or recommendations or practices that our panelists can share in terms of just navigating these things, right? As we continue with our work. So I'll just throw that in to our panel, but I'll ask Meredith as well for her question. And we have a few more minutes. We have around 12 minutes, so we can ponder around these questions. And if not, we can continue our conversation offline.
Actually, my question dovetails well with that one and is inspired by both Alex's comment just now and by your initial question there of what brings people joy during the pandemic, which is, I've been on the job market multiple times. I had somewhat non-standard career in that sense between tenure track positions, research institutions, that sort of thing. And each time the job market is the single worst phase of academic life, I think. It's depressing. It can be humiliating. It's so stretched out. There's no sure ending. Not to scare the grad students who are listening, but I mean, it's just really awful. And so I'm curious, for those who have very recently gone through this, or others who might be here who may be in the process of it now, what's been helpful to you in helping you get through that psychologically, so that you don't get depressed, you don't let it hurt, because it can hurt your physical as well as mental health. And it's just a part of, at the core of it is that as academics, your training is such that it's hard to separate your work from yourself. And an assessment of whether you're the right fit for that job. It doesn't matter necessarily if you know that it's all sort of magic and luck. Not all of it, all of you deserve your positions, but still, that there's a lot of that from a sense that, I'm not worth. It's very difficult to separate these strands. And so I'm just curious what helped, just because that, for me, hearing some of that had been really just useful. Like, what did other people tell themselves? But especially when you compound that with anti-AAPI violence, with a pandemic, with all the other things that are going on, it becomes all the more central to figure out, not even just while you're on the job market, but in general, how do you maintain that sense of self and dignity and integrity and everything else as you go through these just incredibly debilitating strains.
Since we have 10 minutes, we'll invite every panelist to give us like a minute or 2 minutes, and maybe we can end the conversation on a higher note with like really highlighting how we can better take care of ourselves and take care of each other as part of this community. So we invite Jessica, Marianne, Dat, Alex, Tai again to give us and end our conversation with this with their responses.
You know, I definitely will kind of echo what Alex Tai had said about, you know, getting your checkups, and if you are in a so one thing that I had to think about when I was on the job market was, what if I have a gap in insurance, which if you are at an American university is something that we just have to think about, unfortunately. And you know, trying to understand you know, years of months of coverage, and if I'd have to purchase and everything else. And I think that's a logistics question that we often kind of don't think about. And so I would say that's something to keep on your radar is, you know, if you're going to have a gap in coverage, even if you're coming straight from graduate school into a position, sometimes you might be in that position depending on when the start date is. But definitely, you know, even just utilizing mental health services on campus, that was something I did not utilize until my last year of graduate school. You know, better late than never, but still just kind of, so I think especially since seeing in the chat, so many of you are in your first half of your graduate programs, I think it's very important to kind of build that practice in now. Even if you feel like, you know, I'm good with the pressure, I'm fine, that's good. You know, you want to have build off a good foundation then. So either way, and I think, especially from my experience coming from a pretty conservative Asian family, that just wasn't something that was considered an option until I got to graduate school, and a lot of people were more open about it. So I would definitely say that's something important to think about. I did not do this in graduate school, but I know some colleagues do, and they said they kind of treat it as a 9 to 5, where yes, you could do research at any time. Yes, you could, you know, prep for teaching at any time, but you could also think about it as you'll prep and do research and everything within a block of 9 to 5. And so I have colleagues who, you know, they won't respond to emails before that time or after that time, kind of trying to set time limits and then really scheduling that time in. Since, you know, we work such flexible hours that it can be really easy to work too much or to really belabor a point when you're done, you know, at certain points. So I think as a graduate student, if you're still kind of trying to find your groove of how do I know if I'm working enough or not enough, you may want to consider doing that. You may want to consider what some people like with the Pomodoro method, where you work for 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, and kind of cycling through tasks like that. That may be something that you find helpful, that kind of gives you structure. In terms of Nerve's question, it's hard with the rise in anti-Asian violence. Like I don't let my Lola go outside the house by herself now, because you just, you know, you don't know. And something that I've really been struggling with is, you know, at the end of the day, for some people, my PhD doesn't make a difference. You know, not that it makes us any better than anyone else, of course, but just it doesn't matter for some people what you contribute, what you work on, what your grants are, what you teach. You know, to some people, they just look at you and they, you know, and I think for me, something that I've tried, there have definitely been times when I am very much negative about this. And sometimes in my teaching, you know, I teach on US foreign policy. And so kind of the intersection of those things can be very difficult. But I think sometimes it's helpful in those times to think about how our work, either our research, works to address some of these themes, educate more people on it. If we are teaching, we are directly interacting with students, and, you know, some of the students are really impressionable, and it makes a difference sometimes what we learn. And I think Jess may have seen this, but Ceci Cruz, who's over at UBC, she was telling me, yeah, these are really hard topics and really hard times, but our students or our colleagues get to learn from us, our perspectives on these things, and it makes a difference. And if someone who's not familiar with Southeast Asia or who's not familiar with these themes, or in the case of some of us where the work is personal, right? It adds a different perspective that I think makes a difference. And we can kind of bring some of those themes home. So I think that can be one way to think about it.
Thank you, Marianne. Alex and then Jessica, I invite you, and we'll close it after your comment.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for both of those questions. I think it is, so I just want to reiterate what everybody has said so far, is that definitely take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Because I think one of the things about being an academic is that it's really hard to turn it off. Because it follows you everywhere. Like I remember when I was like a graduate student, like you constantly thinking 7 days a week. And it's really difficult because you always feel, and this is another thing that I sort of started to appreciate a little bit more since I moved over here to Europe, is that in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands, they have these things where a weekend is a weekend. Which was actually a very foreign concept to me when I first moved over here, because in the US, you constantly work even during the weekend, and you actually never learn to actually take time off deliberately and to actually learn to enjoy sort of that time off. And it in some way, I think it is a skill that you have to learn, because I think you sort of kind of forget, particularly when you were in graduate school. And taking a little bit of time off and actually make time for that is actually very important, just for you to sort of recover and recuperate. But it is important that you take advantage of any resources that you have on campus, mental health related issues, or even physical health too. So definitely keep that in mind. There's another thing that I want to say. Should sort of escape me a little bit. I'll come back to that in a bit.
I guess I could say I think a lot of it's been said already. Therapy is really important. I will say that a lot of graduate healthcare, they provide therapy. And like Marianne, I didn't know about it. So University of Toronto, they give you like $3,500 a year to go to therapy. And I didn't know that until the last 2 years of my program. So I think availing yourself of professional help does give you perspective, but also like life happens, and you face losses, and it's easier to kind of have that mental health to help you through those crises if you already have a relationship with a therapist. So I think that's maybe a very middle class thing to say, but I think I think it's really important, and I know that Asian Americans tend to not use these services as much as other population groups. And so I would echo that and just encourage you to see what resources are available to you. Rest, of course, rest is part of any, even like physical activity, we need rest days. And that's the same for us as academics and creatives. And then finally, I think cultivating communities of care where you can support each other is really important. I think you can figure out who's, like if you're on the job market together, sometimes it's competitive, but there are other people, depending on your personality type, that will encourage you and support you. And I think, finding those, I guess, people that you can journey with is really important. And
I think I remember the part that I forgot, which is, I think is sort of just to harken back to Alex's experience of sort of transitioning to a different job outside of academia too, is that I also sort of come to a realization recently, because I didn't talk about it, but I think Jessica, I really appreciate that Jessica also talked about sort of all of the other side of it, is all the rejection that you received when you're applying for jobs, and then I sort of recently come to realize too that there are different ways that you can be an academic, and there's different ways that you can use your training. And when you enter into graduate school, I mean, you sort of have this idea that the tenure track job is like the sort of the coveted end goal. And you sort of created a lot of pressure for yourself in some way, because once, if you get a lot of rejection and if that doesn't manifest, then you started to feel sort of terrible about yourself. And I think one of the things that sort of helped me recently is to sort of realize that, yeah, there are other pathways that you can take. And your training doesn't just limit yourself to that one particular systems. And I think it's also important to realize that there are more to your life than your work in academia, right? I mean, there are your families, there's your friends, right? Go out, date, have relationships, and all these kind of things. Because I mean, it's not. Yes, of course, your academic job is what keeps you awake. Is what put your food on the table, but it's not the only thing that really matters.
I mean, graduate student, we really don't have a schedule, right? We go on 24 hours, kind of like, there's no really schedule 8 to 5 that, hey, and then after 5, go home and relax and whatnot, right? So oftentimes what happened is we just roll around the clock without being aware of it. And I'm that type. I'm the type where I've promised my student that Monday I'm going to give them back their midterm. Sunday, my wife was was in labor, and I brought my printer up to the hospital, printing out students' papers so that I can grade, so that I bring it in on Monday. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't take in 2 weeks off and whatnot. But the thing is that might be some of you. Set a schedule, develop a schedule so that you have time for yourself, for your family, for whatnot, so that you can ease your mind and check yourself physically. Addressing Meredith's question about anti-Asian, a lot of us in this room are Asian, and we have Asian parents and grandparents and stuff. Myself, being raised in America since I was a kid, and then yesterday, randomly, my father called me up yesterday as I was working at 3 p.m. here, and he said, "Son, is this Asian hate real, true? Or a white American really hating Asian, us?" And things like that. And then I spent the next 2 hours talking to my father about the whole issues. And I think at times, sometimes us is easy, and I see this a lot online, is we question and we tend to group things into categories, and we said, these are conservative people, these are liberals, these are racist, these are whatnot, and we push our parents, let's say, if they're conservative, into certain groups and stuff, without ever having that communication at all. I come to realize, right? And so I think it's time for us to take a moment, and I know it's a difficult subject for a lot of us, and not every parents are accepting and willing to sit there and listen to the explanation. But then find a way to communicate, to relay all these stories back and forth, and understand their view. And then, at the end of the day, he came to a fuller understanding. Why? Because since we came to America, he was mostly indoor, so he didn't really get to have those interactions that we have. And so he doesn't have the same experience as we have, and so he doesn't have the same reaction to it as we have. A lot of our parents' generation are in that state, and we, I think, as educator, as quote unquote intellectual, are responsible for building that bridge and making that connections with folks in our community. And if we don't do that, it's hard for us then now to push people to categories and stuff. So I would just end it there.
Thank you so much to everybody, to our esteemed panelists, for being candid and comprehensive and specific. Just really amazing amount and wealth of knowledge here. And we appreciate as well everybody who took their time today to join us in this Zoom session. And again, we are continuing with our inaugural conference tomorrow So please visit the website for the information. And again, we want to, again, thank you everybody, to Professor Mary Ann Mendoza, to Professor Jessica Soedirgo, Dr. Dat Nguyen, and Dr. Alex Taivo for their time today and generosity. We also want to give a great shout out, a big shout out to Professor Meredith Weiss and Zheng Wang for really gathering us together today and holding this space for us. And we look forward to being in conversation with everybody in the Zoom room today, and share the information to your networks, to your mentors, to your classmates, to your peers, to your colleagues, and really appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation with each other. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time, but we can keep going and we can keep talking. Feel free to hit us up, send us an email, as our panelists has mentioned. We are here. We are here for you. So we're happy to mentor everybody, not everybody, but anyone. And we're happy to exchange emails and be in conversation again beyond the Zoom conference. Again, thank you everyone. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the week and take care of yourself.